Good morning, and welcome to the next session in the BESA National Conference. Our guest this morning is Fergus Harradence, who's Deputy Director of Infrastructure and Construction at the Department of Business. Welcome, Fergus.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. You're one of the departments that didn't get a name change this time around?
No, fortunately not, although I think I'm on about the fifth or sixth name now for the department over the course of my career within it. So there've been a few.
It keeps us all on our toes, and for those of us who are a little bit older, it means that when we hark back, we sound very, very old when we talk about old department names. Look, I'm going to leave you to get on with the construction playbook, which we consider at BESA very, very important for the future of how we procure. I think Ian McKilwee from the FIS said recently, if you want to see smart construction, you need to see smart procurement first. And that's a very good statement, I think. So over to you, and we'll come back for Q&A when you've done.
Okay, thank you. Good morning again, everybody. As Dave said, I'm Fergus Harradence. I'm Deputy Director for Infrastructure and Construction in BEIS. So my responsibility spans the entirety of the construction sector. So I cover anything from the largest end of the industry, your HS2s and your Hinkley Points, right the way through to people working in domestic RMI. And I also have oversight of the construction products and materials sectors and the professional advisory segment of the construction industry as well. So it's my job really to take a holistic view of the sector and look at how it can improve its productivity and performance over the long term. But what's probably more pertinent for the purposes of today's presentation is that I was one of the authors of the construction playbook when we were drafting this a year ago. And I was responsible for the chapter that relates most closely to BEIS' interests as a department, which is about innovation and technology adoption, or harmonise, digitise and rationalise, as the chapter's known within the construction playbook. But if I just start by quickly giving you a run through of what the objectives of the playbook are. Fundamentally, this is about resetting the relationship between the construction sector and government to make this more strategic and much less transactional. So moving away from the approach in the past of focusing on individual projects and focusing much more on longer term programs, and how we can use a more structured form of engagement with the industry to increase the speed of end-to-end project and program delivery by enabling us to learn from successes and failures in relation to one project and carry them to the next project, but with the supply chain remaining largely the same. And through that, we want to contribute to the delivery of Project Speed, which you might have heard about, which is a project within government chaired by the Chancellor of the Exchequer that's looking about how we can improve the delivery of all major government infrastructure and construction programmes. We also want to use the playbook to make a reality of something that's been oft talked about, but probably more honoured in the breach than the adoption, which is the delivery of best value and embedding this at the heart of government procurement of construction. So what we want to do is look to the long term and ensure that over the life of a built asset, we're getting the best value for money for the taxpayer and the public that will ultimately be the user of the infrastructure or the building that we've procured. We also want to use the power of government procurement to drive the adoption of innovation and encourage the use of digitisation, modern methods of construction as the default for the delivery of government projects and programmes, and also to encourage more sustainable, fairer and effective contracting arrangements right the way down the supply chain. And through doing all of the above, what we want to achieve is a more productive, efficient, innovative, profitable industry where you have more resilient firms, and most importantly, an industry that's capable of consistently delivering better outcomes for its clients than it is at the moment. We also want to improve building and workplace safety, support the transition to net zero carbon, deliver some other necessary environmental benefits, for example, promoting biodiversity, And one thing that you're probably going to hear me talk about quite a bit during this presentation, deliver greater social value, which is investment in skills in communities which are less economically prosperous than others in the UK, and using power of government procurement to ensure that construction is maximising the contribution that it can make to economic growth and prosperity in the UK. So in terms of the approach set out in the construction playbook, it sets out 14 key policy reforms. Some of these were taken directly from a predecessor document to the construction playbook, which is the outsourcing playbook, which was an attempt to improve the procurement of outsourced services within government. And those relate to things like providing more information about future pipelines of work, undertaking market health and capability assessments of firms, identifying what the best delivery model for a particular project or program is, looking at risk allocation, pricing and payment within contracts. But we also wanted to build on that and recognising that construction is specific and different to many other sectors and other types of government procurement. We've included some specific new elements into the construction playbook. And I've highlighted 4 on this slide, which are the ones that are with the slightly darker colour green background. And they are portfolios and long-term contracting, which is really making a reality of what I mentioned earlier about how we shift from a transactional project-based approach to looking at longer-term delivery models, including things like alliances of the sort that we've seen be very successful in the private sector, like the Anglian Water at One Alliance, but also increasingly in the public sector. So, for example, things like the delivery of the A13 upgrade that was overseen by Highways, where we think this structuring, working logically or structuring portfolio of activities and then engaging with the same consortium of firms and their supply chain over the longer term has delivered better results. And indeed, the A13 is really held up as an exemplar in government because it's one of the few projects that we've supported which has been delivered ahead of time and under budget. And everybody, both client side and on the industry side, has been heralding this as a great success and a breakthrough in how you can build a genuine one-team approach to the delivery of a major project. Second chapter, which I was responsible for, is the harmonisation, digitisation and rationalisation of demand. And this is really about looking at how we can use BIM technologies to better design and then manage projects, how we can adopt modern methods of construction for the delivery of buildings that the government procures. So, for example, schools, hospitals through the NHS capital programme, the delivery of housing that government procures directly, social housing accommodation, military housing accommodation, and over time move on from the use of modern methods of construction as they exist now to the adoption of product platforms. And a body called the Construction Innovation Hub, which we've supported through the Transforming Construction Challenge, has been doing some really exciting work on this and developing a product platform, an interchangeable set of component parts that can be used for many different building types. And we're actually in the process of constructing the first building in the UK to be produced using this approach, which is called the Forge. It's on the South Bank and it's a land securities development. But a lot of the component parts of that are going to be ones that we will be taking forward into a design for a net zero carbon school that we're producing for the Department of Education. And we're also working closely with the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS as to how we can integrate these technologies into the delivery of hospitals for the new hospital programme. So there are some really exciting opportunities here, and this could be a new frontier for construction and really improve the delivery of projects and programmes. As I mentioned before, the third element is the outcome-based approach, stopping trying to micromanage the delivery of projects and over-specify what we want in favour of focusing on what the broad outcomes are that we want to achieve, whether these in terms of building or infrastructure functionality and performance, or whether they're in terms of the wider social value, so investment in skills, investment technologies that will reduce carbon emissions, etc. We think that that's really important. And again, I mean, it's key to the shift in approach from just a narrow focus on the what to a focus on the how, and to the delivery of the broader benefits that we want the construction industry to deliver across the UK. And then finally, looking at what we can do to embed digital technologies in the supply chain. So building on the successful experience of sectors like logistics and retail that we've seen over the last 25 to 30 years, and really using digital technologies to improve project management, overcome the information failures, better coordinate work, and improve the efficiency of supply chains and minimize waste. As well as improving payment and contract management processes. We think that these have the potential to have an absolutely transformational impact, and also overcome some of these barriers around miscommunication and a lack of trust within the industry by providing everybody with a common set of information and access to digital tools that mean that clients, investors, funders, and organisations right the way down the supply chain all have a clear common picture of what is being done and what progress has been achieved in relation to the delivery of a project. In terms of the scope of the playbook, it applies as of December 2020, when we published it, to all public works projects that are commissioned by central government departments and our arm's length bodies. So that means things like national highways or Network Rail. It's mandatory for those organisations. It's not mandatory for the wider public sector, for example, local authorities, but we have been working very closely with the Local Government Association, and we know that they are doing a lot of work themselves to look at the approach set out in the playbook and how they can embed this in local authority construction frameworks and in local authority procurement practices. We're also working to implement this. The Cabinet Office is the lead department on this, and they've developed a package of support and training which they're rolling out to assist departments and arm's length bodies to implement the playbook. And within this, we've included sort of technical guidance. Some wider policy measures have been produced, for example, the social value framework that came out in February or March this year. And also the fact that Cabinet Office is offering direct support to organisations engaged in large procurement exercises to ensure that they've got the level of professional expertise that they require to deliver this. And they're working closely with us through the Construction Leadership Council, which is one of the bodies that I sponsor, to encourage the implementation, adoption of the playbook in the private sector and build industry capability to do that. And we've run a whole series of events and seminars and produced various bits of guidance that we hope will enable industry to get a better understanding of what it is they actually need to do to implement the playbook properly. So what is it that firms should do in terms of their own approach to ensure that they're able to win business? Because we believe that they are going to work in a way that's consistent with the approach set out in the playbook. And then what do they need to do to ensure that in the delivery of projects and programs for us, they achieve that? I mean, firstly, I think that it's important that people read the playbook, understand it, and understand wherever they are as part of the supply chain, how they can fit into this and what they think the approach to delivery is and what it will require them to do. And that in particular involves working in a more collaborative and open way than has typically been the case in the industry in the past. We're looking to people to embed value-based procurement in their tender responses. So rather than just focusing on lowest cost, looking at how their approach to delivering the project can contribute to achieving net zero by 2050, and in particular, looking at the 68% reduction in carbon emissions that we need to achieve by 2030, how people can adopt manufacturing-led solutions, invest in innovation, and adopt new technologies, what their approach to health and safety and ensuring building safety will be, and then looking more widely at social and environmental programs and how they can deliver greater social value through investing in skills, offering opportunities to disadvantaged groups, or looking at the way in which they deliver the project and exploring ways of how the design of the building that they're producing or the way in which the firm is operating can deliver things like improved biodiversity or reduced levels of waste. We also want people to submit tender responses that include realistic costs and a fair profit margin. And this is one of the things that we have explicitly said in the construction playbook, that we think firms should be able to make a fair margin of profit, because that is the key to building a more resilient and adaptable industry. We want firms to adopt digital and automated processes and embed these in the supply chain. That's particularly in relation to things like payment, but in future it's likely to encompass things like contract management as well. A really important thing I think is worth emphasise is the importance of quality planning and how this is integrated across the supply chain. So we avoid defects that require rework and cost additional money. If you are a firm that is working on the delivery of a government project, you need to be working in a way that's consistent with the UK BIM framework, which is now the gold standard for this and the one that we require people to work to. And we also want to see firms using the certainty provided by longer-term contracts and pipelines to increase their own investment in skills, people and innovation. And then finally, I think just simply compliance with the ongoing request for financial monitoring and a willingness to engage collaboratively around risks and issues with contractors. And one of the other things that we have included in the Playbook as a stipulation is that contracts should routinely include things like conflict avoidance pledges, which aim to avoid issues escalating into disputes and then escalating beyond that into rather more contentious and legalistic processes like arbitration, because these are things that ultimately do not benefit anyone. And it is far better to identify and then resolve problems before they really do escalate and before people adopt an adversarial mindset. And it's all part of this wider philosophy that we have, that the solution to a lot of problems in the industry is to encourage greater levels of collaboration, a more open dialogue and better information sharing all the way down the supply chain. So I will conclude my presentation at that point, but I think we've got about 15 minutes or so for discussion. I'm very happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Fergus. That's, as always, very informative. And as I said at the beginning of BESA, we very much welcome the Playbook and the introduction of the Playbook. The first question I ask is, why is this different? Why is the Playbook going to be different from, you mentioned a previous thing that was in place, which really hasn't got traction, hasn't really worked. Why will the Playbook be different, do you think?
A couple of reasons. About 6 months ago, I was actually challenged by an academic at a university-led conference on construction who asked me what was new in the construction playbook. And I thought the best way to respond was both to be honest, but also kick the legs out from under his argument by saying, actually, the construction playbook is almost entirely derivative. There is very little in it that hasn't been said before in one forum or another, one report or another, because there have just been so many that have been produced over the last few decades about industry improvement and what needs to change in order to make a better, more productive industry. And what I think the differences are about the playbook is that for the first time, we've brought everything together in a single document. And we aim to, through this, paint a very clear picture of what good looks like from the point at which an organisation has determined it has a particular need for a piece of infrastructure or a construction project to take place, to the point where the completed asset is handed over and it moves into the operational phase of its life. So we've brought all it together, everything together that covers all aspects of the process from pre-market, pre-procurement, pre-procurement market engagement, the undertaking of planning for the project, the procurement process, how you then manage the construction phase of the project, and then how you manage asset handover. And I think that is one key element of this. And then I think the second one is the fact that this is a standardised approach that is mandatory across central government and its agencies, which is not something that we've done in the past. In the past, we've let people have a degree of discretion to do things as they see fit. And what we want to do is say, actually, we think we have got a better chance of delivering what we want and ultimately creating the industry that we want to see if there's a better coordinated and more consistent approach across the whole of government.
I was struck when you did a webinar for us earlier in the year when it was launched, the Playbook, that there were an awful lot of government department people actually had come on to find out about it. So the first question is, could you define what an arm's length body is? And then secondly, describe how it's going to be implemented through those arm length bodies as well as central government.
Sure. An arm's length body is an organisation which is part of central government from the perspective of financial planning and overall organisational management. So, for example, an organisation like Network Rail, it is responsible to the Department for Transport for its policies, its programmes. The Department for Transport gives it its budget, which is ultimately set by the Treasury through the spending review process. But the organisation has a high degree of autonomy in terms of the way it goes about the delivery of those programmes and planning what its priorities are. So you could look at it as a government department that's one step removed from ministers and the politicians that ultimately determine what civil servants like me do on a much more regular basis than they would do for something like Network Rail, where what happens is at the start of a year, the Secretary of State will give broad direction through a priority setting letter, but they will not then be involved in micromanaging the delivery or getting very actively involved in the delivery of individual policies and programmes. So that's essentially the broad explanation of an arm's length body. But some examples which will probably, hopefully, bring it to life a bit more for people are things like the Environment Agency, National Highways, the body formerly known as Highways England, the Defence Infrastructure Organisation in the Ministry of Defence Base, or Homes England, which is responsible for funding housing and is responsible to the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities now.
Right. And does that include local government?
No, local government is separate. There's a different legal basis for the constitution of local authorities. So local authorities and other organisations like NHS trusts are not obliged to comply with the Playbook. All departments and arm's length bodies are, but local government and NHS trusts are not. But we are working closely with them, and they've indicated that they do want to adopt this. And actually, as well as organisations like some of the frameworks and the collaborations between local authorities that exist in regions like the West Midlands, organisations like SCAPE, which is local authority owned, sort of quasi-public-private sector, they are effectively committed to adopting the Playbook in full in the approach to the delivery of their frameworks, which are widely used by local authorities in the health sector.
Great, thank you. And you use the term where they don't use it, it's comply or explain. Who do they have to comply or explain to? Who do they explain to?
I mean, ultimately, it is to the Cabinet Office, which is the lead on procurement policy and process within government. So the Cabinet Office, through the Infrastructure and Projects Authority and also through the Crown Commercial Service, are the people who are ultimately responsible for policing this and requiring compliance with the Playbook.
Great. And can we expect something like an annual report to see how successful the rollout has been?
Yes, I mean, the plan is that we will update the Playbook on approximately an annual basis. And in parallel with that, there's also going to be the publication of examples of best practice or some of the case studies of successful projects that have been delivered and how they've gone about doing this. And I'm also expecting that there is going to be some form of public reporting about the extent to which we think that the Playbook has been adopted and some of the successes that it's had. And also probably we'll be using the Playbook itself to identify some of the challenges that people have experienced in the delivery of that and we will be explaining why various sections have been updated in the light of experience.
Great, thank you. So a question from the floor now. The Crown Commercial Services is always going to want to get the best, he put in brackets, lowest price. How do you square that with the softer, greener agenda, which is likely to be more expensive?
Well, I think philosophically, there is a lot of agreement across government, including within the Crown Commercial Service, that the focus on lowest cost has delivered bad outcomes for everybody, not least for the government as client and certainly for the industry. And they are committed to changing that over time. Now, clearly, I think there's a difference between thinking something is a good thing in principle and actually putting it into practice. And I think that's the challenge that we face now, particularly in the context of what's a relatively tough financial climate for government and industry, where there is a lot of downward pressure on government budgets, certainly after the spending review. But actually, what we do want to see is having firms challenge us where they think that government is bearing down too strongly on costs and pushing too strongly for a cost-based approach in procurement activities and not looking at the delivery of value. And also we have tried to include some mechanisms that we require people to use within the playbook that will hopefully prevent people from doing that, particularly things like should cost modelling. So in future, our expectation is that all major projects and programs will have to produce a should cost model that will hopefully provide a realistic financial framework about what we expect a project to cost, which will enable us to prevent people who've deliberately underbid winning the contract, and will also provide a realistic starting point for financial negotiations with firms in the supply chain about the budget for a project.
Thank you. I think, as I've said a couple of times, we're great fans of the playbook, and we see that for good companies, it's got huge benefit if those rules are followed. And one of the successes, I guess, for you is that the new hospital program have decided to adopt the playbook, and in fact, we're forming a group to liaise with them. Yeah. Which meets for the first time on the 11th of November. And they're specifically looking at off-site MMC and those building of platforms that can be used across the thing. So it does start to generate different thinking when you have an established procurement route set out, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it is absolutely vital that we use some of the government's big long-term programs, particularly the new hospital program and the Department for Education capital program, and really drive the approach that's set out in the playbook into the delivery of these so that they become exemplars for what can be done. And I think over the last year, there have been some successes in relation to the playbook. I think we could have gone further faster than we have done. But I am encouraged by the approach that's being taken by the Department for Health and Social Care. The Department for Education have been there for some time, but also bodies like Network Rail and National Highways, which have been pioneering the use of digital technologies along their supply chains and digital technologies in terms of design. They've also been in the lead in looking at things like the adoption of conflict avoidance pledges and better contract management and more collaborative delivery models. And also starting to see some of the emergence of new technologies. I think our Transforming Construction Challenge programme, which generated the most amazing response from the construction industry across the board, and far better than we thought it was going to generate when we launched this programme back in 2018, has actually shown that it is possible in the space of 3 years to move to a platform-based approach for the delivery of large buildings. I mean, they are literally being built now. We've also seen the development of lots of artificial intelligence applications that can improve project planning, scheduling, health and safety on construction sites. So I think if people do take the time to look around and learn what's going on in the industry and look at some of the exciting things that are being done, they will realise that there is a new and better way of doing construction and a real opportunity to deliver this over the course of the next 10 years.
Great. I'm afraid our time is up. Thank you very much, Fergus. Thanks for coming back to us again. And good luck with the playbook. And to any members who are watching who want to get involved in that group, just drop us a line and we'll hook you up then. Thank you and good morning.
No, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.